Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I am here today in Athens at the Greek War Museum, which doesn't really have any sort of big sign on the facade, but you'll know it when you drive past because there are a number of jet aircraft sitting around outside just over on that side. Anyway, we're here. We're going to go ahead and take a wander through the museum and see what exactly they have on display. So on the way up here, there are actually a number of just sort of incidental displays of firearms around, like this presentation FRF1 that I certainly didn't expect to see here. Some other presentation firearms, and a really pretty cool exhibit of more modern military small arms, including, as we'll see throughout this museum, a number of really fairly rare and interesting pieces. Because Greece is kind of located centrally between so many different major arms manufacturing powers. Okay, let's continue upstairs to the main exhibit hall. So up here, we start with Greece in Antiquity. And overall, what you're going to see through this museum is that there is a tremendous amount of time and conflict and a limited space in which to try to cover it all. So yeah, the more you know coming into this museum, definitely the more you're going to get out of it. There are, well, a little bit less so here in the antiquities area where there just are fewer artifacts to work with, especially for a smaller museum like this, as opposed to like a giant national archaeological museum. But there's a ton of material here, and there aren't a whole lot of giant walls of text trying to explain to you everything that there is. So, like I said, the more you know coming in here, definitely the more you are going to get out of it. And there are a variety of, I think, just really cool, interesting artifacts or displays in and amongst all the sort of things that you would normally expect, period artifacts, pictures, that sort of thing. So the main sequence of the museum is a series of major periods in Greek history. We start here with a hall on Alexander the Great, and then we move to Byzantium. By the way, I apologize for all these starts and stops here. There are a bunch of people visiting the museum, and I just want to be courteous to their privacy here. Also, there are going to be a lot of reflections in the various display cases throughout the museum. There's a lot of areas, especially later on, that are open to natural light and have some really bad reflections, but I'll do my best here. So next up, we move to the Frankish and Turkish period of Greek history, when Greece was, of course, controlled by the Ottoman Empire. Here, we're going to start seeing firearms from this period, as well as, of course, older style of artifacts and weaponry. Next up, we have the Greek War of Independence, 1821. Obviously, this is a big, important subject for them, when Greece got its independence from the Ottoman Empire. And again, we're going to start to see more and more firearms appearing, and they are firearms from a huge variety of different places. There are arms here from Russia, from Italy, from all sorts of places in Eastern Europe, from France, from Britain, just over different time periods. A huge variety of different weaponry came into Greek use. All right, so we're still in Greek independence here. A lot of photos in this area, not as much in the way of artifacts, but some. Now we move on to basically the modern Hellenic state. So this isn't going to include war in Macedonia, And this is a really good example to show you some of the odd, like just interesting mixture of small arms that are here. So we have Mannlicher Schonauer engraved gilt carbine there, and then a Mannlicher, a Browning pistol, a French 1874, and one of those like stereotypical gigantic Gasser revolvers. A 7-barrel naval flintlock compared to a Gatling gun action. We have some French rifles, Chassepot and Gras. And now into the Balkan Wars. Actually, I should be more specific. The 1912-1913 Balkan Wars. There have been a lot of Balkan Wars. Once again, we have uniforms, we have sabers, we have firearms, we have statues, we have photographs and paintings, a wide variety of different material on exhibit here. So more of the Balkan Wars, and also now the First World War. The assortment of, again, some interesting small arms here. That is actually a naval line throwing gun. Light machine guns in use. The Greek army used all sorts of different mostly allied weapons, but they did use the Shosha, they used the Lewis. We have a French Hotchkiss 1914 over there. Again, some really cool models, ships, aircraft. You know, it's hard to cram an entire, several thousand years of military history into a single museum. And they've done a pretty good job here. Obviously, this isn't going to give you a complete education in Greek military history. Far from it. You need to know the history coming in here, and then the museum really helps you fill in the pieces and personalize a lot of it. This, by the way, is a Breda 1935. This is the 1914 Breda converted to use belt feed, which is pretty cool. There are a couple of those actually in here. German guns captured and used by the Greek army. And then some really obscure stuff like the Czech version of the Browning aircraft gun that uses Lewis gun magazines. This brings us from the First World War into the Second. And here we go. Here's a nice wide selection of machine guns. We've got another one of those 1935 Bredas, Schwarzlos, a Breda 37, an Italian light mortar, a Hotchkiss 1928. This is an interesting gun in that we've had a bunch of these parts kits come into the US, and it was never like, there's always a little bit of a question of who actually used these. Well, the Greek military used these, and there are 3 or 4 of them throughout this museum. So some German, some more Italian. Madsen gun taken from the Bulgarian military. That's the sort of variety that you get with Greek World War I and World War II small arms. Now the next room is specifically about the Battle of Crete in World War II. And here, for example, is another one of those Hotchkiss light machine guns. Neat diorama of the action. There are a couple of dioramas like this throughout the museum. And an overall assortment of World War II small arms that saw use in Greece. All right, so that is the main top floor of the museum. However, there's a bunch of other stuff on the first and second floors down below. So let's go downstairs and take a brief look through some of that, because there's a bunch more guns downstairs in a variety of different places. Here, for example, we have a selection of World War II arms, a lot of things captured by Greek military forces, a lot of material here from the Greek resistance to German occupation. And again, a neat combination of arms. Now here, of course, this is pretty much US, British, Italian, German, because those are the countries that were active in this theater. But if you're interested in any of those, there's a pretty good selection of all of them throughout here. Again, we have some cool models. You know, it's hard to put a whole ship in a museum like this, so they do some models. Most of the captions on items here are in both Greek and English, which is helpful. So again, this is what I talked about with the reflections. Even without the camera in person, this is a little hard to see sometimes. This is a Carcano-based interesting bullpup that is described as an improvised rifle used by the resistance built off an M38 Carcano. That's pretty cool. And by the way, no, that's not a Hotchkiss, that's in a Chatellerault. So, variety of material through here. Captions, like I said, mostly in English and Greek, although there are the occasional panels like this that are only in Greek. And the descriptions are overall very accurate. I found a few little minor things that aren't quite right, but in general, very well done. At least, you know, on the small arms where I have some idea what they're talking about, as opposed to the larger equipment that is outside of my field of expertise. There is then a section on the Korean War, because the Greek military sent a significant element to fight in the Korean War with the UN forces there. This is starting to get a little bit long for a tour, but we have a specific small set of rooms here on Crete that go from prehistoric Crete through the various Greek and Roman periods, and then into more modern Crete, including the issues with Turkey, shall we say, which give us a chance to see another batch of interesting modern small arms of both Western and Soviet bloc. Yet another hall down here on the base floor is dedicated to the collection of Petros Saroglos, who was apparently, aside from being a military officer, at the time, very much a collector and historian and small arms aficionado, and donated his very significant collection to the military. It ended up as part of the display here, and it has its own long hallway. So we have a bunch of other people in here, so I'm going to skip down to the most modern small arms, let them explore the older stuff while I do a little bit of filming right here. So yeah, again, I apologize for all the reflections, but this was a collection of interesting small arms, not specifically things used by the Greek military, but for example, we have a couple of magazine trials rifles here, American weapons, French weapons. Because it's French, I'm going to point this guy out. This is actually a commercial purchase Lebel rifle, and it is not an M93. That is the early pre-1893 version without reinforcement, without a gas relief block. Those are really scarce to find. There's also a 1884 French Kropatschek. So had to comment on those, obviously. But wait, there's yet more. If you head downstairs, there are no major exhibits, but there is this one little extra hall with a bunch of antique arms. We're kind of going, decreasing in age. We're getting to more modern stuff here, but a wide variety of them. And then kind of going backwards in age again on the other side. So again, there are descriptions here. But the more you know coming in, the more you're going to get out of this. So do your research before you come here, and then plan to spend longer than you would normally expect for a museum like this. All right, that is the inside. There was a lot more in that particular hall, but there were a lot of people in there, and I just want to be cognizant of their visits and their privacy. So I will leave it to you guys to come down here and check that out yourself. A lot of the rest of the material is earlier, spears, swords, armor, both Eastern and Western. Not my area of expertise, but it sure looked like a lot of cool stuff. And the inside, by the way, is not the extent of the museum. There is also a a walkway around the outside of the museum that includes a bunch of other cool stuff, like this guy, which is a 15mm version of the ZV-37. So we'll take a quick look at some of these before we head out. I believe that's a 25mm Bushmaster and a dual 20mm Oerlikon. Some additional artillery. That's 40mm Bofors. So a whole bunch of stuff out here in the main area of, well, the main frontage of the museum, which is actually not quite the main entrance, but a British 25-pounder, actually 2 British 25-pounders, helicopters, missiles, a couple of aircraft. And then another set of display pieces on the other side of the building. So that's a 1939 Hotchkiss anti-aircraft gun, complete with its sighting mechanism, which is pretty cool. Got a Huey down there. We have a Schneider mountain gun. Pretty cool crest on it. I believe that is a French helicopter. We have a Skoda small mountain gun. And another of the Hotchkiss 1939 anti-aircraft pieces. All right, and I will just close out with this Greek, basically special operations 2-man diver delivery vehicle, or mini submersible, that they have out here in front of the main entrance because I have a particular interest in diving. So there you go. That thing is pretty darn cool. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that look through the Greek War Museum. I found a lot more in there than I was expecting, to be honest, and spent more time in there than I was planning to spend. So if you are here in Athens, if you're here to see the ancient Greek monuments, definitely plan some time to come by and check out the War Museum as well. Thanks for watching.